this.
Some moments are supposed to shine forever in memory, crystallized in joy and promise. Wedding days are meant to be the beginning of everything beautiful, the first page of a love story written in hope and devotion. But for Celeste Hartwell, standing in the marble-floored bridal suite of the Rothschild mansion, this day felt like the final chapter of her old life closing with a whisper, not a celebration. The girl who once spent sunrise hours cataloging wildflowers in dewy meadows, who could identify 300 plant species by touch alone, who dreamed of discovering new life in forgotten corners of the world, was about to become someone else entirely. Someone she didn't recognize in the mirror. The reflection staring back at her wore a gown that cost more than her father's yearly salary before everything collapsed. French lace cascaded down her slender frame, each stitch holding the weight of obligation and sacrifice. Tiny pearls dotted the bodice like tears frozen in time. Her auburn hair had been twisted into an elaborate updo that made her neck look fragile, exposed. The makeup artist had painted her face into porcelain perfection, but no amount of artistry could hide the sadness swimming in her green eyes. Those eyes had once sparkled with curiosity over microscope slides and field journals. Now they held only resignation. Outside the suite, classical music drifted through the corridors of the Rothschild estate, a sprawling testament to wealth accumulated over 3 generations. The mansion wasn't a home but a monument, all sharp angles and cold elegance, designed to impress rather than comfort. Celeste had been inside only twice before today, both times feeling like an intruder in a museum where she didn't belong. Soon she would live here, walk these halls every day, sleep in rooms that echoed with emptiness. The thought made her chest tighten until breathing became a conscious effort. Her father, Thomas Hartwell, appeared in the doorway. Once a proud man who ran a successful import business, he now carried himself with the stoop of defeat. The past year had aged him a decade. Gray had invaded his temples, lines had carved deep grooves around his mouth, and his suit, though freshly pressed for the occasion, hung slightly loose on his diminished frame. When his business partner vanished with their capital 6 months ago, everything unraveled. Debts emerged like hungry wolves. Creditors circled, bankruptcy loomed, then crashed down like an avalanche, burying their modest but happy life. Thomas had tried everything to save them. He sold their family home, his car, his wife's jewelry that he'd kept treasured after her death 5 years ago. Nothing was enough. Then Damien Rothschild's lawyers appeared with a proposal that sounded like salvation wrapped in silk. A merger of families through marriage. All debts cleared, a modest trust established for Thomas's remaining years, respectability restored. The price was simply Celeste's future. She had wanted to refuse with every fiber of her being. But watching her father's hand shake as he explained their situation, seeing the desperate hope kindle in his eyes when he mentioned the offer, she found herself unable to speak the word no. Thomas had raised her alone after losing his beloved wife, working endless hours to fund her education in botanical sciences, never once complaining about the sacrifices he made. He attended every school presentation, every science fair, celebrated every small achievement like it was a miracle. When she earned her position at the Riverside Botanical Research Center, he cried with pride. How could she watch him lose everything when she held the power to save him? How could she preserve her dreams while his entire world crumbled? So she agreed, and watched something die in his eyes, even as relief flooded his features. Gratitude mixed with guilt, love tangled with shame. Neither of them spoke much in the weeks leading to this day, both trapped in the knowledge that they were trading one person's happiness for another's survival. The ceremony began at exactly 4 o'clock, timed with the precision that governed everything in Damien Rothschild's world. 400 guests filled the grand ballroom, a cavern of wealth decorated with 10,000 white roses imported from Ecuador, their fragrance almost suffocating in its intensity. Crystal chandeliers worth more than Celeste's entire childhood home cast prismatic light across faces she didn't know. Tech industry moguls, politicians wearing practiced smiles, socialites glittering with diamonds and sharp observation. These were Damien's people, his world, and Celeste was the newest acquisition being unveiled. She walked down the endless white aisle on her father's trembling arm, each step carrying her further from the life she knew. The The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon with flawless precision. But the music sounded hollow to her ears, a beautiful shell containing nothing. Eyes watched from every direction, assessing, judging, calculating her value in this transaction. She kept her gaze fixed forward on the man waiting at the altar. Damien Rothschild stood like a statue carved from ambition and ice. At 36, he had built a technology empire that revolutionized data security, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. His dark hair was swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it ever showed warmth. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of winter storms, gray and impenetrable. His custom-tailored tuxedo fit him like armor, expensive and perfect, designed to intimidate as much as impress. When Celeste reached him, he didn't smile. His hand took hers, with the emotion of a businessman accepting a signed contract. Cold fingers, firm grip, nothing more. The minister's words washed over her in meaningless waves. She heard herself speak the vows, felt the heavy platinum band slide onto her finger, a shackle disguised as jewelry. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Damien leaned in for the required kiss. His lips brushed hers for exactly 2 seconds, a calculated gesture for the cameras clicking around them. There was no tenderness, no promise, just obligation fulfilled. The guests applauded, and Celeste felt like an actress in a play she hadn't auditioned for, performing a role she'd never wanted. The reception stretched for hours, an elaborate display of excess. Champagne flowed. A 12-tier cake towered like a monument to unnecessary luxury. And a famous jazz band played for guests who barely listened. Celeste sat beside Damien at the head table, smiling until her face ached, while he conducted business conversations across her as if she were invisible. When people approached to offer congratulations, he would place his hand on her shoulder, the gesture appearing affectionate to observers, but feeling like ownership to Celeste. She was an asset now, a beautiful addition to his portfolio, displayed for approval. Margot Rothschild, Damien's mother, presided over everything from her position of power beside her son. Tall and severe, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to lift her eyebrows. She watched Celeste with the warmth of a jeweler examining a questionable gemstone. During a moment when Damien stepped away, Margot leaned close, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. "You understand your role here, I trust?" Margot said, her voice cultured but cold. "You will attend the functions I select. You will dress appropriately. You will not embarrass this family with inappropriate behavior or associations. Many women would sacrifice anything to be where you are. I suggest you remember your good fortune and act accordingly." Celeste wanted to respond, wanted to say that fortune felt more like imprisonment, but the words caught in her throat. She simply nodded, feeling herself shrinking under Margot's penetrating stare. The older woman smiled, satisfied, and patted Celeste's hand with fingers that felt like talons through silk gloves. As midnight approached, guests finally began departing. Thomas found Celeste for one last embrace, whiskey on his breath and tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "God forgive me, I'm so sorry." She held him tight, wanting to say everything would be fine, wanting to absolve him of guilt, but the lies wouldn't form. She kissed his weathered cheek and watched him leave, feeling like the last anchor to her real self was walking away into the night. Then she and Damien were climbing the grand staircase alone, toward the master suite that would be her cage. The room was enormous, decorated in blacks and grays, dominated by a bed that looked more intimidating than inviting. Celeste stood near the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, uncertain what was expected but dreading every possibility. Damien walked to the bar and poured whiskey into Crystal, taking a long drink before turning to face her with eyes that held no emotion at all. "Remove that dress. It costs $40,000 and needs proper preservation. There's a robe in the bathroom." Her hands shook as she reached for the zipper, but it was too high, beyond her grasp. She looked at him helplessly. With an expression of annoyed inconvenience, he crossed the room and roughly pulled the zipper down in one harsh motion. The gown pooled at her feet, and she stood exposed, vulnerable, grabbing the expensive fabric and fleeing to the bathroom. When she emerged in the silk robe, Tied as tightly as possible, Damien sat by the window. Still holding his drink, he looked at her with something between contempt and indifference, studying her like she was a problem to be solved. "I suppose you're expecting me to consummate this marriage," he said, his tone mocking. "I suppose you think this is the part where I sweep you into passionate romance like some fairy tale." Celeste couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She simply stood there, waiting for whatever cruelty came next. Damien stood and approached, stopping inches away. "Let me clarify something immediately. This marriage is a business arrangement, nothing more. You saved your father from complete ruin. I acquired a respectable wife to improve my public image. That's the extent of our relationship." He leaned closer, whiskey-scented breath washing over her. "I'll never touch you again. You'll have your own suite down the hall. You'll attend functions when required, smile appropriately, play the devoted wife for cameras and observers. But privately, you're nothing to me. A beautiful ornament, Celeste. And ornaments exist to be displayed, not touched." The words struck like physical blows, each one landing with precision designed to wound. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, refused to give him that satisfaction. He saw the moisture gathering and smiled, cruel and cold. "Your room is 4 doors down on the left. I have an early meeting. Don't disturb me." Celeste walked past him on legs that barely supported her weight, found the room he indicated, and closed the door. Only then did she allow herself to collapse, sliding down the wall in her expensive robe, crying silently into her hands. This was her wedding night, supposed to be magical, supposed to be the beginning of everything beautiful. Instead, she'd been rejected, humiliated, reduced to decorative furniture in a loveless mausoleum. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and shock, a small spark of defiance refused to die completely. Celeste Hartwell had always been stronger than she looked, had survived losing her mother, had fought for every achievement in her field. This wasn't how her story would end. She didn't know it yet, but that tiny spark would grow, would eventually become a fire that would change everything. Her real story was just beginning. 3 months passed like seasons in a frozen greenhouse, each day identical to the last. Celeste learned to navigate the Rothschild mansion like a ghost haunting rooms that would never feel like home. She mastered the art of smiling at charity luncheons while feeling nothing inside, of making polite conversation with women who measured worth in designer labels and social climbing. Margot monitored her every move with the attention of a warden, offering criticism disguised as guidance, ensuring Celeste understood her place in the carefully constructed Rothschild image. Damien remained a stranger who occasionally shared the same address. He left before dawn for his technology empire, returned after midnight if he returned at all, and when their paths crossed, he looked through her as if she were transparent. The few social events they attended together were performances where he played the attentive husband for cameras, while treating her like expensive baggage in private. Celeste had stopped hoping for anything different. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. One cool morning in early autumn, desperate for escape from the suffocating routine, Celeste wandered the estate grounds beyond the manicured gardens. The property stretched over 15 acres, most of it meticulously landscaped, but at the far eastern corner, hidden behind overgrown hedges, she discovered something unexpected. An old greenhouse stood like a forgotten memory, its glass panels clouded with age and neglect, the frame rusted but still standing. Vines had claimed the exterior and inside. Wild growth had reclaimed the space from human intention. Celeste pulled open the stubborn door and stepped into another world. Despite the abandonment, life persisted here. Wild ferns pushed through cracked floor tiles. Climbing jasmine wound around support beams, and in one corner, a cluster of purple orchids somehow survived against all odds. The air smelled of earth and green things, of possibility and forgotten potential. For the first time since her wedding day, Celeste felt something shift in her chest. The tiniest crack in the ice that had formed around her heart. She returned the next day with gloves and basic tools borrowed from the maintenance shed, telling no one where she was going. The staff had learned to ignore her movements, and Margot rarely rose before noon. Celeste began the slow work of reclaiming the greenhouse, clearing debris, replacing broken glass panels, testing the old irrigation system. The work made her hands dirty and her muscles ache, and she loved every minute of it. Here, she wasn't Mrs. Rothschild, the decorative wife. She was Celeste again, the botanist, the scientist. The woman who understood that growth required darkness before light. 2 weeks into her secret project, she heard footsteps on the gravel path outside. Panic flared, expecting Margot's disapproving face, but instead, a man appeared in the doorway, holding a clipboard and wearing work clothes covered in grass stains. He looked to be in his early 30s, with sandy brown hair, warm hazel eyes, and an easy smile that seemed rare in her current world. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "I'm Oliver Bennett, the new landscape designer. I was surveying the property and saw someone moving around in here. Didn't realize anyone knew this greenhouse existed." Celeste stood, suddenly self-conscious in her dirt-streaked clothes and tangled hair, so different from the polished image she maintained in the mansion. "I'm Celeste. I live here. I found this place and thought maybe I could restore it." Oliver stepped inside, his eyes scanning the space with professional interest in something else. Appreciation for her efforts. "You've already made impressive progress. These old structures have good bones if you treat them right. What's your vision for it?" She returned the next day with gloves and basic tools borrowed from the maintenance shed, telling no one where she was going. The staff had learned to ignore her movements, and Margot rarely rose before noon. Celeste began the slow work of reclaiming the greenhouse, clearing debris, replacing broken glass panels, testing the old irrigation system. The work made her hands dirty and her muscles ache, and she loved every minute of it. Here she wasn't Mrs. Rothschild, the decorative wife. She was Celeste again, the botanist, the scientist. The woman who understood that growth required darkness before light. 2 weeks into her secret project, she heard footsteps on the gravel path outside. Panic flared, expecting Margot's disapproving face, but instead, a man appeared in the doorway, holding a clipboard and wearing work clothes covered in grass stains. He looked to be in his early 30s, with sandy brown hair, warm hazel eyes, and an easy smile that seemed rare in her current world. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "I'm Oliver Bennett, the new landscape designer. I was surveying the property and saw someone moving around in here. Didn't realize anyone knew this greenhouse existed." Celeste stood, suddenly self-conscious in her dirt-streaked clothes and tangled hair, so different from the polished image she maintained in the mansion. "I'm Celeste. I live here. I found this place and thought maybe I could restore it." Oliver stepped inside, his eyes scanning the space with professional interest in something else. Appreciation for her efforts. "You've already made impressive progress. These old structures have good bones if you treat them right. What's your vision for it?" They talked for an hour, and Celeste found herself speaking with an enthusiasm she'd forgotten she'd possessed. She explained her background in botanical sciences, her research work before the marriage, her dreams of creating a space for rare and endangered plant species. Oliver listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he actually cared about her answers, not just waiting for his turn to speak. "The estate has a massive budget for landscaping," Oliver said thoughtfully. "I could probably work the greenhouse restoration into my proposal. Frame it as preserving historical structures and promoting biodiversity. If you're serious about this, I could help make it official instead of a secret project." Celeste wanted to say yes immediately, but caution held her back. "I don't think my husband or his mother would approve. They prefer I focus on social obligations, not personal projects." Oliver's expression shifted slightly, something like concern crossing his features. "With respect, Mrs. Rothschild, you live here too. You should have space to pursue your interests. Besides, from what I've seen of estate management, they approve my proposals without much scrutiny. Let me handle the politics. You focus on the plants." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Oliver would arrive in the mornings with supplies, tools, replacement glass panels, and they would work side by side restoring the greenhouse. He taught her about structural integrity and climate control systems. She taught him about plant biology and symbiotic relationships in cultivation. Their conversations flowed easily, moving from professional topics to personal stories, from botany to books, to the small observations about life that reveal character, Celeste learned that Oliver had grown up on a small farm, studied landscape architecture against his father's wishes, and believed that nature wasn't something to dominate, but to partner with. He spoke about plants the way she did, with reverence and wonder, understanding that every species had purpose and beauty if you paid attention. He made her laugh with stories about difficult clients and absurd design requests, and she found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone in months, about feeling invisible in her own life, about missing her work, about the loneliness of living in a house full of people who treated her like furniture. Oliver never pried, never pushed for information she wasn't ready to share. But his presence was like water to drought-stricken soil. Around him, parts of herself she thought had withered began showing signs of life again. He brought her botanical journals to read, shared articles about new conservation techniques, and celebrated her small victories like successfully grafting a rare rose variety or coaxing growth from seeds everyone else had declared dead. One morning, Celeste arrived at the greenhouse to find Oliver examining something with intense focus. "You need to see this," he said, excitement in his voice. In the far corner, hidden behind the jasmine she'd been training, a cluster of orchids bloomed in colors she'd never seen before, deep purples fading to silver. With patterns that seemed to shift in different light, Celeste knelt beside them, her trained eye immediately recognizing something extraordinary. "These shouldn't exist," she whispered, carefully examining the flowers without touching them. "This coloration pattern, this structure. Oliver, I think these might be an undocumented hybrid, possibly even a new variety. Can you identify the parent species?" Oliver asked, understanding the significance. She studied them carefully, her mind cataloging details. Partial characteristics of Dendrobium and Phalaenopsis, but the coloration is wrong for both. If these grew naturally here, if they're truly unique, this could be important for conservation genetics. We'd need to document them, get proper identification from experts. Oliver pulled out his phone. "I'll photograph everything. You should contact your former colleagues. See if anyone can help with identification. If this is as special as you think, the botanical community should know." Celeste felt her pulse quicken with something she hadn't experienced in months. Genuine excitement, professional purpose. "I worked with Ruby Chen at Riverside Research Center. She specialized in orchid genetics. If anyone could help, she could." Then reality crashed back. "But I'm not supposed to be doing this. If Margot finds out I'm pursuing botanical work instead of attending her approved activities, there will be consequences." "Sometimes the best things grow in secret," Oliver said quietly. "Document the orchids, reach out to your friend, see where it leads. You can decide what to do with the information later, but don't let fear kill something rare before it has a chance to bloom." That afternoon, while Margot was occupied with her social club meeting, Celeste sent an email to Ruby with photographs and detailed descriptions of the orchids. The response came within hours, Ruby's digital voice practically shouting with excitement. The orchids appeared to be a naturally occurring hybrid of species that shouldn't be able to cross-pollinate, making them potentially valuable for genetic research and conservation programs. Ruby wanted to visit, to take samples, to present findings at the upcoming International Botanical Conference. Celeste stared at the email, torn between excitement and terror. This was real opportunity, a chance to contribute to her field again, to be more than decorative. But it would mean revealing the greenhouse, explaining her project. Facing Margot's disapproval and Damien's indifference, it would mean choosing herself, her passion, her identity over the comfortable numbness she'd learned to inhabit. That evening, for the first time in their marriage, Celeste waited in the main living room for Damien to come home. He arrived after 10, loosening his tie as he entered, surprise flickering across his face when he saw her. "Is something wrong?" he asked, the first personal question he'd directed at her in weeks. "I need to discuss something with you," Celeste said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've been restoring the old greenhouse on the eastern grounds. I've discovered potentially significant orchid specimens, and I want to pursue proper documentation and research. It won't interfere with social obligations, but I wanted you to be aware." Damien stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. The greenhouse. Why would you waste time on that? Because I'm a botanist, Celeste said, feeling anger spark beneath her carefully maintained composure. Because I have a degree in botanical sciences and 5 years of research experience. Because before this marriage I had a career and purpose, and I'd like to reclaim some small part of that. Something shifted in Damien's expression, surprise giving way to irritation. Your purpose now is being my wife, attending events, maintaining appearances, representing this family appropriately. That's what we agreed to. You agreed to that? Celeste said, her voice rising despite her intention to remain calm. I agreed to marry you to save my father. I never agreed to stop being myself completely. I'm not asking for permission, Damien. I'm informing you that I'm pursuing this. The greenhouse project doesn't affect you, doesn't impact. Your image doesn't require anything from you except basic acknowledgement that I exist as more than decoration. Damien's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his gray eyes. My mother won't approve of this. Your mother doesn't own me, Celeste said, the words surprising even herself with their force. Neither do you. I've played the perfect wife for 3 months, smiled until my face hurt, worn the right clothes, said the right things, and been invisible when required. But I will not give up the one thing that makes me feel human again. If that's unacceptable, then we have bigger problems than a greenhouse. For a long moment, Damien simply stared at her, and Celeste saw something flicker in his eyes that she couldn't identify. Not quite anger, not quite respect, something more complex. Finally he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Do what you want with the greenhouse. But if it becomes a problem, if it reflects poorly on this family in any way, it ends immediately. Understood? It wasn't approval, wasn't support, but it was acknowledgement. Celeste nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Watching as Damien turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the vast living room with her small victory and the larger questions it raised the next morning, Margot appeared at breakfast with pursed lips and sharp eyes. I understand you've taken an interest in the old greenhouse. Yes, Celeste said simply, refusing to apologize. Ow! Quaint, Margot said, the word dripping with condescension. A little hobby to occupy your time. Just ensure it doesn't interfere with your actual responsibilities. The Charity Gala Committee meeting is Thursday at 2. Don't be late. As the weeks progressed, Celeste's world split into 2 distinct realities. In one, she remained Mrs. Rothschild, attending functions, wearing designer clothes, and speaking in carefully measured tones about nothing that mattered. In the other, she was Celeste the botanist, working in her greenhouse, corresponding with Ruby about the orchids, and slowly rebuilding her professional identity. Oliver became her partner in this double life, helping maintain the greenhouse while respecting the boundaries of her marriage. Their friendship deepened, but both of them carefully avoided crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. He never asked about her relationship with Damien, and she never offered details. But his kindness, his encouragement, his genuine belief in her abilities fed something in her soul that had been starving. One afternoon, as they worked together transplanting seedlings, Oliver spoke quietly. You know, watching you these past months, seeing you come back to life around these plants, it makes me think about a concept in landscape design. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in the harshest conditions. Adversity forces roots to dig deeper to find resources others might miss. The flowers that bloom against all odds are often the strongest, the most resilient. Celeste looked at him, understanding the metaphor. Are you saying I should be grateful for this situation? No, Oliver said firmly. I'm saying you're stronger than you know. And when you finally decide to bloom fully, nothing will be able to contain you. These orchids you found, they're surviving in conditions that should have killed them. They're thriving despite abandonment. That's not luck. That's determination written into their genetic code. I think maybe you have the same code. His words stayed with Celeste long after he left that day, echoing in her mind as she attended another meaningless social function, smiled at another group of strangers, and returned to the mansion that felt less like a prison than it had months ago. She was changing slowly, like spring growth breaking through frozen ground. The greenhouse had given her purpose. Oliver's friendship had given her hope. And the orchids had given her proof that beautiful things could survive impossible circumstances. She didn't know what would come next, couldn't predict how her small rebellion would grow or what consequences it might bring. But for the first time since her wedding day, Celeste felt like the future held possibility instead of just obligation. The seeds of change had been planted, and she was finally ready to see what might bloom. Winter arrived early that year, frost painting the windows of the greenhouse in delicate patterns that Celeste studied each morning like natural artwork. The orchids she'd discovered became the focus of serious scientific attention after. Ruby's initial assessment confirmed their uniqueness. Researchers from 3 universities wanted samples. Genetic analysis revealed characteristics that could advance conservation efforts for endangered species. And the botanical community buzzed with excitement about the accidental hybrid that had survived. Decades of neglect. Celeste found herself pulled back into the world she'd left behind. Corresponding with colleagues, reviewing research proposals, and writing detailed documentation of the greenhouse's ecosystem, it felt like remembering how to breathe after months of holding her breath. Each email and phone call reminding her that she had value beyond her last name and her ability to smile appropriately at strangers. Ruby was visited on a cold December morning, arriving with equipment and enthusiasm that filled the greenhouse with energy. They spent hours examining plants, taking samples, and talking about research possibilities. Ruby was exactly as Celeste remembered, brilliant and warm, with dark hair constantly, escaping from practical ponytails, and an ability to make complex genetics sound like poetry. I can't believe you've been hiding here playing housewife, when you could be contributing to actual science, Ruby said, carefully labeling a sample. These orchids could lead to breakthrough research in adaptive genetics. You found them, Celeste. This is your discovery, your contribution. Don't let anyone diminish that. It's complicated, Celeste said quietly, a phrase that had become her standard explanation for everything about her life. Ruby stopped working and looked at her directly. Is he good to you? Your husband. Are you happy? Celeste considered lying, maintaining the fiction that everything was fine. But Ruby's genuine concern cracked something open inside her. He's not cruel, she said carefully. He's just absent. Our marriage is a business arrangement that saved my father from bankruptcy. Damien made it clear from the beginning that he doesn't want an actual relationship. I'm here to improve his public image. That's all. That's horrible, Ruby said bluntly. You deserve so much better than that. Maybe, Celeste said, turning back to the orchids. But this greenhouse, this work, it's giving me something. I'm finding ways to be myself again, even in impossible circumstances. That has to count for something. The conversation shifted, but Ruby's words lingered. Later, after Ruby left with her carefully packed samples, Celeste sat alone in the greenhouse and let herself actually feel the weight of her situation. She'd been so focused on surviving, on finding small spaces for herself within the confines of her marriage, that she hadn't stopped to consider what she really wanted from her future. The question felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. Oliver arrived as afternoon light filtered through the glass, carrying supplies for the new ventilation system they'd been installing. He took one look at Celeste's face and set the equipment down. He asked gently. Clarifying day, Celeste said. My friend Ruby asked if I was happy. I realized I don't even know how to answer that question anymore. I'm not miserable every moment. The greenhouse makes me happy. This work makes me happy. But the life around it feels like wearing clothes that don't fit, pretending they're comfortable when they're slowly suffocating me. Oliver sat on the workbench beside her, close enough for comfort, but respecting careful distance. My grandfather used to say that plants teach us everything we need to know about life if we pay attention. Some species adapt to harsh conditions and survive. Others refuse to compromise their nature and die rather than change who they are fundamentally. Neither approach is wrong. But the strongest plants are the ones that adapt while preserving their essential character. They bend without breaking, find creative ways to reach sunlight, grow roots deeper when surface conditions are hostile. Are you saying I should stay? Celeste asked. I'm saying you're the only one who can decide what thriving looks like for you, Oliver said. But I'll say this. You're different than you were 3 months ago. Stronger, more yourself. Whatever you decide about your marriage, don't abandon the growth you've achieved. Don't let anyone convince you that finding yourself again was a mistake. That evening, Celeste walked through the mansion with new eyes, seeing it not as her prison, but as a structure she'd learned to navigate while maintaining her core self. She'd bent, yes, but she hadn't broken. She'd found cracks where light could enter, spaces where she could grow. The question wasn't whether to stay or leave, but what kind of life she wanted to build, and whether it was possible within these walls. She found Damien in his study, surrounded by monitors displaying financial data and corporate reports. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his features. They rarely sought each other out, their interactions limited to required public appearances. "We need to talk," Celeste said, her voice steady. Damien leaned back in his chair, studying her with those cold gray eyes. "About what?" "About our arrangement. About what this marriage actually is, and what it could be." "I thought I made our situation clear on our wedding night," Damien said, his tone dismissive.
"You did,"
Celeste agreed. "You told me I was nothing to you, that I existed only for appearances. And for 3 months, I accepted that because I didn't have the strength to question it. But I'm not that person anymore. The greenhouse, my work, it's reminded me that I have value beyond being decorative. I have skills, intelligence, and purpose that don't disappear just because you refuse to acknowledge them." Damien's expression hardened. "Is this about that landscape designer? Has he been filling your head with romantic notions?" "This is about me," Celeste said firmly. "Oliver is my friend and colleague, nothing more. But even if he were something else, what right would you have to object? You made it clear you don't want me. You can't claim ownership while offering nothing in return." "I gave you everything," Damien said, his voice rising. "This house, financial security, social position. You live in luxury most people can't imagine." "I live in isolation," Celeste countered. "Beautiful isolation, yes, with expensive furniture and designer clothes, but isolation nonetheless. You treat me like a possession. Your mother treats me like a disappointing employee. And I'm expected to be grateful for the privilege. Well, I'm done pretending that's enough." Damien stood, and for the first time, Celeste saw genuine emotion in his face, beyond cold indifference. Anger, yes, but something else beneath it, something that looked almost like pain. "What do you want from me?" "I want honesty," Celeste said. "I want to understand why you proposed this marriage at all. You could have hired an actress to play the devoted wife at public events. Why go through the legal complexity of actual marriage? Why me specifically?" Damien turned away, staring out the window at the darkened grounds. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and Celeste thought he might simply dismiss her again. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "Because I knew you wouldn't try to change me. You were desperate, trapped by circumstances. And I thought that would make you manageable, safe. I didn't want someone who would expect love, or try to fix me, or demand emotional availability I can't provide." "Why can't you provide it?" Celeste asked softly. "What happened to you that made you this way?" Damien's shoulders tensed. "That's none of your concern." "It is if we're going to continue living this lie," Celeste said. "I'm not asking you to love me, Damien. But I am asking you to see me as a human being instead of a decorative object. I'm asking for basic respect and the freedom to pursue my work without feeling like I'm committing treason against your image. Can you give me that much?" He turned back to face her, and in his eyes, Celeste saw something she'd never noticed before: fear. He was afraid, she realized, not of her, but of what vulnerability might cost him, of letting anyone close enough to hurt him. "I had a fiancée before you," Damien said abruptly. 6 years ago, her name was Catherine. "We met in college, built a relationship over years. I thought we understood each other. Then my father died, left me the company, and everything changed. The wealth, the pressure, the constant scrutiny. Catherine couldn't handle it. Or maybe she could handle it too well. She started appearing in gossip columns, seeking attention, using our relationship for fame. When I asked her to stop, she threatened to release private information unless I gave her a massive settlement. I bought her silence, ended the engagement, and decided I was done letting anyone close enough to destroy me. Celeste absorbed this understanding, clicking into place. So you married someone you thought couldn't hurt you because I needed you more than you needed me? Yes, Damien said bluntly. That was the plan. Except I'm not staying small enough to fit your plan anymore, Celeste said. I'm growing beyond the box you tried to put me in. So what happens now? Damien studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. The orchids you discovered, they're significant. Potentially groundbreaking for conservation genetics, Celeste said, surprised by the question. And this matters to you? This work. It's who I am, Celeste said simply. Take away the greenhouse and the research, and you're left with a shell pretending to be a person. Damien nodded slowly. My mother will hate this. She believes wives should support their husband's work, not pursue their own. Your mother doesn't get to write my story, Celeste said. Something almost like respect flickered in Damien's eyes. No, I suppose she doesn't. Proceed with your research. Publish your findings. I'll handle my mother. But understand this doesn't change our fundamental arrangement. I'm still not capable of being the husband you might want. Right. I'm not asking you to be, Celeste said. But maybe we could try being partners instead of strangers. Mutual respect instead of cold indifference. It's not love, but it's better than nothing. In the weeks that followed, something subtle shifted between them. Damien didn't suddenly become warm or affectionate, but he stopped treating Celeste like she was invisible. He asked about her research, listened when she explained her findings, and even attended a presentation she gave at a local university. The gesture meant more than he probably realized. His presence in the audience, a silent acknowledgement of her value. Margot was predictably furious when she learned Celeste was pursuing professional work, calling it unseemly and inappropriate for a Rothschild wife. But Damien, to Celeste's surprise, defended her decision, telling his mother that Celeste's scientific contributions reflected, well, on the family and demonstrated they valued substance over superficial social climbing. Margot didn't surrender gracefully, but she stopped actively interfering. Thomas visited for the first time since the wedding. His health improved now that financial stress no longer consumed him. He found Celeste in the greenhouse, surrounded by plants and research notes, looking more like his daughter than she had in months. You look happy, he said, tears in his eyes. I'm finding my way, Celeste replied, hugging him. It's not the path I would have chosen, but I'm making it mine. That's enough for now. I'm so proud of you, Thomas whispered. Not for surviving, but for refusing to let circumstances erase who you are. Ruby's research on the orchids gained traction, leading to an invitation for Celeste to present findings at the International Botanical Conference in spring. It would be her first professional appearance since the marriage, a chance to reclaim her identity in the scientific community. She accepted without hesitation, knowing this was a door opening. A path forward, Oliver continued working on the estate grounds, their friendship deepening but remaining carefully platonic. He never pushed for more, understanding that Celeste was still figuring out who she was and what she wanted. One afternoon, as they worked together transplanting rare ferns, he mentioned a position opening at a prestigious botanical garden in Scotland. It's directing their conservation program, Oliver said. Dream job, really. But it would mean leaving in 2 months. Celeste felt unexpected sadness at the thought of him leaving, realizing how much his presence had meant to her recovery. You should absolutely take it. I haven't decided yet, Oliver said, looking at her with those kind hazel eyes. Some things are harder to leave than others. Don't stay because of me, Celeste said gently. I care about you too much to be the reason you pass up your dreams. Oliver smiled, sad and understanding. Maybe we both needed each other for a season. Maybe that's enough. As winter gave way to early spring, Celeste stood in her greenhouse, surrounded by blooming life she'd helped nurture from abandonment. The orchids that had started everything thrived in their controlled environment, rare and beautiful, surviving against odds that should have killed them. She'd done the same, she realized, finding ways to bloom in hostile conditions, growing roots deep enough to sustain her, reaching toward light even when darkness surrounded her. Her marriage to Damien, would never be a fairy tale, would probably never involve love in the traditional sense. But it had evolved into something livable, a partnership based on mutual respect, if not affection. They were learning to coexist, to support each other's work, if not their emotional needs. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And something was infinitely better than the nothing she'd started with. Most importantly, she'd reclaimed herself. The greenhouse stood as proof that beautiful things could grow from broken circumstances. That strength came from adapting without surrendering your essential nature. That blooming where you're planted didn't mean accepting being trampled. It meant finding ways to thrive despite everything. Reaching towards sunlight with determined roots and patient growth, Celeste didn't know what her future held. Didn't know if she'd stay in this marriage forever or eventually choose a different path. But she knew she'd survived the worst, had grown stronger through adversity, had learned that she contained multitudes no one could diminish. And that knowledge, that unshakable sense of self, was worth more than any wedding vow spoken in a moment of desperation. She was Celeste Hartwell Rothschild, botanist, scientist, woman who had learned to bloom in impossible conditions. And her story was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning to flower.